Hi, Chestnut Grove. This is Pastor Andy Gathman, and this is the final lesson of our 6-part series called Cultivate. If you're finding us on YouTube, you might want to click on the link below, which will take you to our website where you can find some additional resources. Now, we've been talking about how we can cultivate a spiritual life of fruitful abundance throughout this series. And in this lesson, we continue with John's Gospel, picking up where we left off in Lesson 5 with the metaphor of the vine and the branches, where Jesus tells his disciples if they stay connected to him, they will be abundant and fruitful. We're closing today with Jesus' words about how we can produce fruit that is not only abundant, but also that's lasting. So let's turn together to John 15, verses 8 through 17. Jesus said, "My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I've said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because a servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I've heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." Well, in just that short passage, there's a lot that Jesus is trying to communicate to his disciples. He wants them to know about abiding in his love, about obeying his commandments, about becoming his friends and not just his servants, about how much God loves them, just as God loves Jesus himself. He wants them to love one another, and he wants them to bear fruit that will last. But right there in the middle of that passage, Jesus talks to them about joy. And he says, "I've told you these things so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." It's really easy to overlook that short little passage, but I think it's crucial to everything that Jesus has been saying, particularly everything he's been teaching his disciples about bearing fruit. Joy is right there in the center. It's interesting because when Jesus is telling them about joy, it's really on the eve of when he's about to go through the most horrific experience of his life, really of anyone's life, which is, of course, to be crucified and die. It makes you wonder, if Jesus can talk about joy in a time like this, why has it been so elusive for us? What are we missing? Well, I think one possibility is that we have been stuck in a joyless cycle. This is how I think it goes. When we face a threat, often our first response is a desire for control. Instinctively, we look for either success or we look for people who are like us that can help us protect ourselves from that threat. But those two moves, successism and tribalism, ultimately they lead to isolation and division. When all you're seeking after is success, it gets pretty lonely after a while. Either you're not as successful as you wish you were, and you're driven out by others, or you separate yourself from those who are less successful than you. It gets pretty lonely. And if you're only ever looking for people who are like you, who think like you, who act like you, who look like you, pretty soon you're dividing the world between us and them. And all that isolation and division ultimately lead to anxiety and hatred. And when we're filled with anxiety and hate, what do we want? Well, we want to be able to control those things, because more and more things appear to be a threat, and the cycle continues. And when that cycle is going, it's really hard to develop any fruit, much less lasting fruit. But Jesus here in John chapter 15 is trying to teach us about a joy-fueled cycle. where when we face a threat, rather than trying to seek to control our world, we instead abide or relax in Jesus. And we recognize that we, along with others, are accepted based on grace, not based on our performance or based on who we are. And as we recognize that, we're able to connect joyfully with other people. We begin to experience authentic love and acceptance, and that fills us with joy. And as we experience that joyful connection, we're able to help one another obey Jesus' commands. And as we do so, and we learn to trust Jesus in deeper ways, we can again abide and relax in Jesus' love in new and more creative ways. And as this cycle, which is sparked by the joy of our connection with one another, we're able to experience not just abundant fruit, but fruit that lasts. It's all about the joy. When we are full of joy, we're most able to be ourselves. Think about it. When you see the face of someone who you love and who's delighted to see you, aren't you just filled with joy because you're able to just be yourself with them? That's what joy is. Without joy, we ultimately forget who we are. And we fall victim to that cycle that I just talked about. But with joy, even in difficult circumstances, we can still feel deeply connected and filled with joy. Maybe you've had the experience of even going to a funeral and you're grieving, and yet at the same time, when you see the face of someone you love who's glad to see you, over top of that grief, you feel deep joy. Similarly, you can be in a wonderfully happy circumstance, but without people to share it with who love you and who you love, oftentimes there's something missing. What's missing is joy. Indeed, God intends us to be filled with joy. And that's why Jesus puts joy in the middle of this passage about bearing fruit that will last. Well, if joy is so important that Jesus would put it right in the middle of this passage about having lasting fruit, I guess the question is, how do we cultivate that sort of joy in our lives so that we too can have lasting fruit? So I leave you with some exercises to help you cultivate the sort of joy that Jesus is talking about so that your life can be filled with that spark so that you can bear the sort of lasting fruit that Jesus is talking about. I'm going to give you 2 exercises that you can do to help build this kind of joy. The first is a daily experience of joy. Now, it can be hard to experience joy directly just by trying to. And so gratitude can be something that is a pathway for experiencing joy. So I want you to think of a specific memory for which you are grateful. And this should be a memory that you, number one, feel gratitude in your body when you think about it. You know, you feel that rush of emotion. And that in that memory, you also feel connected to God. When you've found that memory, go ahead and give it a 2 or 3 word title. That'll become handy in a moment. And then simply spend several minutes remembering this moment. Note how you feel in your body as you immerse yourself in that memory. And ask yourself, what might God be communicating with you in this memory? I hope as you do that, you experience joy in a meaningful way. And then the final step would be to build a list of 10 such occasions, and then use that list to spend 5 minutes each day allowing yourself to experience the joy of those memories. Pick a few of those memories and allow yourself, as you feel this deep gratitude, to experience joy in a visceral way. The second exercise is to develop a life-giving list. All you need to do is develop a list of people, places, and activities that can help you feel fully alive and remind you that you are God's child. Now, these are things that are particular to you. Look for things that fill you with a sense of joy or contentment or gratitude. And as you build your list, keep it handy and make sure you schedule some time for the items on your list every week. Now, a handout to help you with this is in the link below. Throughout this series, we have been talking about cultivating a spiritual life of fruitful abundance, the sort of life that from the inside out enables us to live the love and the grace of Jesus Christ authentically. And joy is a central component to being able to live that out. Not in a plastic, contrived way, but in a deeply authentic way. You know, Jesus went to the cross for us. Jesus rose again for us. Jesus gave his Spirit to us. And the promise of the gospel is that the good news is not simply for the hereafter, but also for each and every day. As you cultivate the fruit of the Spirit in your life, and as you cultivate the joy that is part of that fruitfulness, may God bless you and teach you a little bit more each day about his deep grace and love.